Hi, I'm Lady Redhawk, and I'm welcoming you to an interview with Sheila Brune, who is an artist, teacher, and priestess hierophant of the Fellowship of Isis. And I'm going to have on the radio show Spiritually Speaking, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Needs, where we're going to discuss at length power. And it's a very timely conversation, especially for Americans, because rights of women are being eroded in many states. And to understand how power is gained, how it's stolen, how it's subtly socialized into the hands of some and out of the hands of many is a very, very intriguing subject. And so I'm here to speak with her about divided consciousness, understanding power. We are doing this in conjunction with the radio internet series, Spiritually Speaking, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Needs. And you can catch the full conversation of this on susiepeltier.com/live show. It airs at 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. So, welcome, Sheila.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. It's wonderful to have you on this side of the pond for a little bit. The thought of this video came up because she and I had a remarkable conversation about divided consciousness, a way of understanding power. And in pagan spirituality, one of the hardest things that pagans find when they're making the transition is it isn't necessarily the values they have trouble with or even the practices, but there's something that holds them back from claiming their full divinity, from claiming their birthright, from claiming their full power. And you were breaking down for me some work by an anthropologist that seemed to explain that, and she called it divided consciousness.
It was actually Mary Daly, who's a theologian,
now
dead in fact, but very famous in her lifetime, and her work has carried on. And this is a theory that she had called divided consciousness, where she looked at the different forms of power. Luke's, who talks about different forms of power, defines them as coercion. So coercion's not a good form of power because people see it coming and fight back. Compliance, so people are kind of pressured to comply with something. Influence, which is what subordinate groups, race, class, gender have in terms of power as subordinate cultures. And legitimacy, which is the cheapest way to have power. And the way that you have that power is you set up a religion, you set up God, and it comes through religion and art. So if you set up God and God makes man in his own image, then nobody questions it anymore. That is a just so kind of situation. And what happens is that people internalise the legitimacy of the dominant culture through growing up and learning about men's culture in school, all the things we have around us that kind of legitimate men, art shows that are of men's view of the world. So if only men's view of the world is shown, then that's normal. That's how everybody is. And most people would think that men's culture is everybody's culture. Although having studied women's culture for 24 years, I realise that is not the case. So through learning about the dominant culture, you internalise that at a very deep level of being. And that means that when you come to operate from your own sense of legitimacy, you have a block. All the doors can stand open and you police yourself from walking through them. And so this is what's happening in a way, I think, with what you're saying about people taking on a belief system, but actually all the legitimacy that they have internalised is kind of conflicting with their own legitimacy to change and to create a new way of operating.
Mm-hmm. And we see this a little bit more emerging now with a political climate, especially in the United States, where women's rights that we thought we had sorted out 30, 40 years ago are now being under assault again.
Yeah.
And we're finding women are rising up, but they're slow to do so. And part of this is a questioning of our own power and legitimacy then.
But also a dominant culture will absorb the ideas of the subordinate culture and then put them forth as their own. So this is very, very common, that women have ideas and a culture that they and anything that's threatening them to the dominant culture becomes absorbed and modified and changed. Or there are also sanctions in society. There are few kind of legal sanctions, but there are two great sanctions, one of which is disapproval, and that is massive. You know, people react very badly to mass disapproval. And the second one is ostracism. You blank them, you blank it out, you know, and kind of send somebody into a kind of area where they're not being talked to. And that's a very powerful sanction. And so these sanctions kind of back up the divided consciousness.
And this also plays into in pagan thinking, we are God, we are the divine, we are embodying the divine. So power is not outer, and we don't need to do supplication. We don't need to enter into, when we're in worship, we don't have to do it from a kneeling position, so to speak. And this idea of power outer versus inner power is very much, goes along with this divided consciousness.
Yeah, this is something that Starhawk, the famous Jewish American witch, talked about, the difference between power over, dominance, power over, or power from within, so that you can see somebody. We can all recognise the emanation of spiritual power from certain people. People like the Dalai Lama, for instance, is a great kind of contrast to our kind of Christian and Jewish and Islamic leaders. You know, he has a stillness and a radiance that we don't normally see, and so people flock to him because they feel this power from within, which is an amazing thing in this day and age. I think it's his destiny to have lost his place in Tibet, so he comes out into the world and we see this. It's a great healing for us to see this man and the way that he is.
Yes, and he seems to draw cross-culturally and cross-religious bounds.
Yeah.
So that's very good. So in this last legitimacy piece of the four ways of power, the equation of God to man and no one questioning God. Where do you think the women's, where do you think the goddess fits in? Because
with goddess spirituality, women are made in the image of the goddess, and men are made in the image of God. So it isn't to actually turn things around the other way and make men illegitimate. It's to say that we are all children of the God and Goddess, and that I mean, in the early manuscripts that they found in the Nag Hammadi scrolls, there's a wonderful piece called Thunder Perfect Mind, where the goddess says, and men walk with me and women are within me. So you know, the goddess legitimates all of us, both men and women. But we can also say, you know, like in the Fellowship of Isis, the Fellowship of Isis is set up to promote the goddess in the world because it wants to balance up the imbalance. But we also revere the god. So we can have an Iseum or a hearth to the goddess, or to the goddess and God, but not just to God, because there's so much of that already that the world is out of balance.
Thank you, Sheila, so much for coming. It's been a pleasure talking with you and sharing just a little bit of this topic, and we're going to hear much more of it on Spiritually Speaking, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Needs. And you can hear the show on susiepeltier.com/live show. And also the date will appear on Spiritual Seekers Radio on the Facebook page. So please follow us along on this very, very important conversation. Sheila, thank you again. Hail and farewell. Namaste.
Namaste.